I've never been one to spend time at the racetrack. But a few weeks ago, I received a message from one of our esteemed congregants. The message related the story of a fellow by the name of Kevin, who was heading to the betting window at the track, and he noticed a rabbi dressed in a long black coat with a long gray beard who was praying over one of the horses. Now, Kevin was always looking for some edge. So he decided to take a chance and bet on that horse with 15-1 odds. He bet to win. And indeed, the horse won by a full length and a half. Kevin ran back to the paddocks where the horses are saddled up before the next race. And again, he sees the rabbi now praying over another horse. He bets again on the horse to win. And indeed, the horse wins by 2 lengths, paying 20-1. This is too good to be true. So it's now the last race of the day, and he sees the rabbi praying over yet a third horse. Kevin realizes this is his ticket to a fortune. So he bets all of his winnings and then some. He runs to the stands to watch the race, and to his total disbelief and horror, the horse stumbles out of the gate and dies. He's now totally broke. He finds the rabbi and demands to know what happened. Why did the prayers not work for that horse? Rabbi, I need to know what happened. The rabbi calmly stroked his beard and asked Kevin, "Tell me, do you go to synagogue every day to pray?" "Are you kidding me, Rabbi? I'm not even Jewish." "Oh, so that explains it," says the rabbi. "You obviously don't know the difference between a bracha and a Kaddish." A bracha, a blessing, and a Kaddish, the memorial prayer. In a certain sense, they are polar opposites, one representing happiness and all good things, and the other ultimate grief and sorrow. Throughout our lives, we encounter both the blessing and the Kaddish, sometimes even at the very same moment. Life is like that, filled with contradictions and paradoxes and mixed emotions. A bracha and a Kaddish. I have found myself, as maybe you have, encountering both on the same day. I have recited the Kaddish with a grieving family at the burial of a loved one, and then a few hours later stood under the chuppah to recite the Sheva Brachot, the 7 nuptial blessings. I've chanted Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, the priestly blessing at the naming of a newborn infant. And then later in the evening, recited Yitkadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabbah with mourners who are sitting Shiva. Life is often the juxtaposition of joy and sadness, happiness and grief, both integral to the lives we live. The question is it possible to hold joy and sadness together? Can we do it without the feeling that we are so swayed back and forth that it causes us to lose all balance in a swirl of dizziness? Let me share with you something that took place some months ago. I awoke early one morning and I was about to sit up and recite the Moda Ani prayer, which thanks God for the gift of a new day. And suddenly I felt this swirl of dizziness, as if the room were spinning around me. So I lay back down, and immediately I did what any irresponsible person would do. I consulted with Dr. Google. And Dr. Google seemed to suggest that this was a case of vertigo, hopefully a benign type having something to do with the inner ear, which I didn't fully understand. But in any case, I'm happy to report it did resolve fairly quickly and hasn't since returned. So I bring this up because this positional physical vertigo is not the only kind we might encounter. The contemporary biblical scholar Aviva Zornberg has coined a term called theological vertigo. In a recent book called Torah in the Time of Plague, edited by Erin Lieb, Zornberg is quoted writing about the death of our matriarch Sarah. The Torah tells us she died right after the episode of the binding of Isaac. And the sages conclude that she died from the shock of hearing not that her son had died, but that he almost died. That he came by a few millimeters close to death by the knife of Abraham. She was nivhala. Nivhala, as one of the commentators writes, which means she was shocked. But what exactly does the word nivhala mean and suggest? Zornberg writes that it conveys a dizziness, a vertigo, where we find ourselves totally unable to understand God's providence. It's where we lose the sense that there's any order or coherence in this world. Do I need to tell you that there is so much these days to disorient us, to make us feel as if the world is spinning out of control? Virtually every day there's something new. I don't need to enumerate storms that wreak utter havoc, wildfires that consume everything, the horror and chaos of Afghanistan, high-rise buildings that collapse in a split second. I can go on and on and on, and all of this is in the midst of a virus that just doesn't seem to want to go away, but rather mutates from one variant to another. And yet somehow we persevere. Because amidst all of this, amidst all the Kaddish, there is still the blessings. We bury loved ones, but then children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are born. We may be depressed over the chaos in the world, but then there's a bris, a baby naming, a simcha to celebrate, a new home to build and move into. There are still the basic pleasures of everyday life, each and every one a blessing. And the great challenge is not to allow the Kaddish to overwhelm the blessing. So how do we navigate? We turn to the wisdom of our Jewish tradition. There's a very beautiful and fascinating section in the Talmud, in the Tractate Bava Batra. Tanu Rabbanan, Kishacharav habayit b'shniya, Rabu prushim b'Yisrael, shelo lecho basar velo lishtos yayin. The sages taught that when the second temple was destroyed, there was an increase in the number of ascetics among the Jews, who because of their grief would not eat meat nor drink wine. Omar lahem Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Joshua said to them, "My children, for what reason do you not eat meat or drink wine?" And they said to him, shall we eat meat and drink wine, which were part of the service at the temple altar, and now all of that is gone? Amar lahem imkain lechem lo nochal. Rabbi Joshua said to them, if so, let us not eat bread nor drink water, for those too were part of the service at the altar in the temple. My children, he said, I will tell you how we should act. To not mourn at all is impossible, but to mourn excessively is also impossible. So this is what you should do. When you build a house, leave a small section without plaster or paint. When you cater a meal, leave out just one small item. When you gather for a wedding, be joyous, but declare, Im eshkachechi Yerushalayim, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, and then break a glass at the conclusion of the ceremony. Rabbi Joshua is telling us, make room for the Kaddish. Don't run away from it. Give it its place and its space. But also say the blessings, go on living, and embrace the joy of life. This teaching from our sages offers us profound guidance. And sometimes we have to look around and find inspiration from the lives of others, no matter where they come from. So let me tell you about JeanBaptiste Allez. It was the 23rd of October, 1994. In the midst of the genocidal war in Burundi in Africa, it was a war between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Allez was then 3 years old, and he was playing outside with friends and siblings in his village. Along came a group of armed neighbors. They arrived with machetes and with spears, and they proceeded to massacre everyone. And they decapitated his mother right before his eyes. And then they attacked him, and they left him for dead, with devastating cuts to his neck, his back, his arm, and his right leg, which later had to be amputated. This child, orphaned in one of the poorest places on earth, missing a leg, who for years could not sleep without nightmares. He was eventually fitted with a prosthesis. He was adopted by a French family, and he went on to become a world-class athlete in track and field, who competed in the Paralympic Games in London and in Rio. How many of you know that the Paralympic Games just took place in Tokyo, just finished? It is an extraordinary event, far more inspirational in my mind than the regular Olympics. It brings together athletes with all sorts of major disabilities. I watched a remarkable documentary recently called Rising Phoenix. The film highlights the lives and the achievements of Allez and others. There is Beatrice Vio. She's an Italian fencer who was just 11 years old when she contracted meningitis. Doctors saved her life, but they had to amputate both her legs at her knees and her forearms. Somehow she returned to her sport, And she went on to win the gold medal in her category in Rio in 2016. And just last week, I followed this, and I read that she won the gold again in Tokyo. It is hard to believe. In these Paralympics, there are swimmers competing without limbs, others who have no eyesight. There is an archer who with no arms uses only his feet. There is a table tennis player who has no arms, and he competes holding the paddle in his mouth. What you see is an absolutely incredible tribute to the possibilities of the human spirit. Men and women who, after saying their own personal Kaddish for their immense losses, go on to focus on the blessing of their lives, and they achieve incredible things. If all this was not sufficiently inspirational, the film also highlights the one individual who played an outsized role in making all of this possible. It was the 1930s in Germany, when Ludwig Guttmann, a prominent Jewish neurosurgeon, escaped the clutches of the Nazis and made it to England. He was put in charge of a hospital for patients with major spinal cord injuries. In those days, it was accepted that there was little you could do for them. For many, you simply gave them morphine for their pain and you waited for them to succumb and die. Guttmann said there had to be a better way. While everyone else was preparing to say Kaddish, he was looking for the bracha, for the blessings. And he had his patients turned every 2 hours to avoid bed sores. He had them engage in strenuous physical activity. And yes, he introduced them to sports activities, unheard of at the time. Out of this eventually grew the Paralympics movement. Guttmann was a religious Jew. And there can be no doubt that he was motivated and inspired by the fundamental principle of the Torah that we are all created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And even those who had previously been left to die deserved every effort to make themselves whole again to the fullest extent possible. He succeeded in rehabilitating their disabled bodies and also their broken spirits. Today is Rosh Hashana, the beginning of the new year. This new year follows one that has been filled with recitations of Kaddish, many more than we would have liked. But there have been blessings as well. And as we go forward, our charge is to be ready to embrace both the bracha and the Kaddish, but most importantly, to never allow the Kaddish to overwhelm us. We can learn much from Rabbi Yehoshua, and we can be inspired by those around us, such as the Paralympians I've mentioned, and so many others who have dealt with loss and difficulty and went on to embrace the joy and meaning of life. Uvachartem b'chayim. We read last week in the Torah, Uvacharta b'chayim, you shall choose life. So let us begin this new year, and facing whatever challenges that may arise, let us be inspired to live with a bracha with gratitude and with fortitude. L'shana tova tikatevu v'techatemu. May we be written and sealed in the book of life for good health and blessings. And let us all say, Amen.